difference this week because we only changed to the summertime this weekend. So there's always this funny week where I am an hour too late to see the Open because I realized that Canada is a week earlier than us.
Yeah. My mom is in Europe, so I know about this time change because we got confused earlier
Hmm.
in the week. Well, it's good to have you here. I think we got some really good topics. Several companies I want to pick your brain about. Um, but I guess the first place to start is how is the month of March going for you in your portfolio? Have you noticed any shift, between February and March?
Yeah, for sure. I I'm not really I'm not looking at the big picture too much. Well, I do that, but I don't try to talk about it too much. Let's put it like this. But I felt like, hey, this is one of the few years where December and the early months of the new year were not really good to us, and that doesn't really happen very often. In most cases, you get at least a spike, and of course, there was a bit of a spike, I think, in November, but not as I expected it. And I was thinking, well, if we will see a market turn in the near term, it has to be March or April because I don't see a market suddenly, a junior mining market suddenly happen in May or June. It's just it could continue in May or June or July, I think, but it could not really start based on the number of markets I've looked at, even markets that I haven't experienced myself, but just looking at the chart. So I even bought a couple of call options on silver the first day before MIF 2 weeks ago, and also the week before, because I was just speculating on if it will happen in the near term, it will happen right now, and otherwise it will probably only happen end of the year or next year. So, and those options are looking quite good right now, and also the portfolio itself is doing quite well. Yesterday was a really good day for the markets, and my stocks didn't do much. But in the days before yesterday, for some reason, my stocks did really well, and so yeah, I can certainly notice.
Yeah, definitely a bit of a shift here in the last couple of weeks, and especially last week with gold getting above 2,200 there on Friday. I was speaking with Sean, the CEO of Dolly Varden. We were having a space, and in the middle of the space, I looked at the gold chart. I'm like, 2,200. What the hell?
Hmm.
So yeah, but here we are. We're pulling back a little bit, but it's healthy. It's healthy. We can't go up in a straight line. So you have a number of companies that I think we messaged about. I'm not sure where you'd like to start, but Barksdale, Delta Resources, Sun Peak came up. I think maybe Orion, and then I just want to pick your brain about when a company is getting ready to drill. So they're getting ready to mobilize, and there's the anticipation of the drill program, and investors buy in anticipation, sort of maybe like a trading strategy around that. So let's start wherever you want to start. Just pick a topic or a company, and then we'll just go from there.
Well, the week started with a big surprise to me with Orion, and not a surprise that it happened, but more a surprise of the timing, I guess, because last week I was in Toronto and I saw the Orion guys a number of times. I had dinner with them, and and we was even talking a little bit around like, hey, how would this play out at some point? And I was just interested in their thoughts about it. And yeah, apparently over the weekend, it's finally a certain move started happening with Rupert approaching B2 Gold to acquire their 70% in the joint venture with Orion. And I think this is what most Orion shareholders saw coming at some point, but the timing was very uncertain, and it's happening, and it could go in so many directions. So it's very difficult to know how it plays out, but I think it's exciting to see that something is happening in terms of consolidation over there.
Yeah, so basically it was March 11th, which was Monday morning, and Orion put out news 8:45 a.m. saying they received notice from B2 Gold of an offer to acquire B2 Gold's JV interest at Helmi, which is 70% B2, 30% Orion. And if you read the news release, it says that Rupert Resources has offered as consideration 28,644,111 common shares of Rupert, implying a total value of 102.8 Canadian dollars for the 70% interest in the JV company. So that sorts of that it's kind of it gets a little more complicated from there. But Orion has a ROFR on Helmi. So that means that if there's a binding offer made for the other 70% that Orion doesn't own, then Orion has the right to match it. And so I think from here, a bit of chess is going to be played. They have until May 9th, 2024 to decide whether to exercise the ROFR. So it's a very interesting situation. And I've read Haywood's report, Red Cloud's report, Pi Financial's report. They all see it as positive for Orion, but nobody knows exactly how this plays out because Orion doesn't have $102.8 million in their treasury right now, and their share price is not high enough to possibly make an offer in shares. So there has to be a third player involved. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think if you go a step back, I think most people, they look at this number and they think, oh, the 30% Orion owns is probably worth 44 million now. It has sort of an official sort of mark in the sand, and with their 72 million market cap right now, it values all the other discoveries in the ground at an EV of 20 million because they have a bit of 10 million of cash in the bank, I think. But if you go a step back and you think, okay, why would Rupert even do a deal? And of course, the obvious is it has a big economic impact on their project that there's a border over there because they cannot really shape their open pit. So that's one thing. And you could solve that with a layback agreement, the way Orla did it with Fresnillo a couple of years ago for 85 million Canadian, 63 million US. That's one reason there's value in it for them to to own this ground. But then, what are the ounces that B2 Gold and Orion have already delineated at surface, and nobody knows, but it's it could be a million ounces or more. And if you value them at $50 an ounce or 25, you can also put 25 to 50 million of value to it, or perhaps more if there's more ounces. And then I think the most interesting thing right now is also Ickery has this high grade zone on the western side that they didn't really test the plunge yet, but it's in a podcast this week or last week they talked about that plunge and they talked about what it could offer. And if it really is plunging towards Orion, it could be a bit of this Canadian Malartic story, right? When Abitibi Royalties owns this extension of Canadian Malartic, and it got $4 or $5 million worth of value for this joint venture. But then when Canadian Malartic started becoming, significant and real, and they were building it, and they started drilling towards this ground, suddenly that became part of the deposit. And actually, it came all together. It was one big deposit, and that will be the future mine. So it's early days, I think, still for the Helmi ground. And what if this is all connected to Ickery, or it is just part of a bigger system where Orion owns, the deeper part of the system and also the surface part, which is maybe less impressive than Ickery, but it's still there at surface. So that has potential value. And then another thing is that you have it's a major land position that completely is central to this major fault line that controls this gold camp. So you have land position, you have the ounces they already have, you have the depth potential, you have the layback agreement, this plunge. So there's way more than just the 44 million that may be there, and that's why there's certainly a good chance, I think, because there's not just that layback agreement they need. I think they want to have the full land position, which in my opinion is worth more than what's currently being offered. And there's also another take, of course, that there's strategic value. I mean, if somebody wanted to own Ickery and felt like, well, how can we compete with Agnico, who owns 20%? Well, this is the other way in, I guess. So there's also, you could put a dollar value on that angle. So how it's going to play out, I have no idea. But I think there are so many angles to look at it where there's way more value than the 100 million, even though it seems like a big number. That I think something will happen in the next 60 days. But what? That's going to be for 2 months from now. I think it will take a bit of time before we know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. So, thinking bigger picture, Rupert made this offer clearly in a premeditated fashion. They planned this for some time, I'm sure. And the timing of it is no accident. I mean, B2's share price just bounced off a 52-week low, and they've had some operational challenges at some of their mines. So $100 million might come in handy for them. I think they make a pretty good profit if they sell their 70% interest, just based upon the data I've seen in terms of how much they paid for it and how much they put in the ground. But it's just interesting thinking that these sorts of deals are starting to take place. There's more consolidation taking place. There's more transactions taking place. Just at the end of last year, a company that I own called Vanstar got bought out for their fully carried interest in a feasibility stage, gold deposit in Canada. And so some of these, loose ends are getting tied up, around the gold mining sector. And it feels to me like these are the sorts of transactions that happen at or near a major low in a sector. So again, like you, I have no idea how this is going to play out either, but it is very interesting because it could set in motion quite a bit of consolidation in the central Lapland gold belt of Finland. So let's go to Africa because we're in Finland. So let's fly down to Africa, to Eritrea, a place I've never been, but I've heard.
Ethiopia.
Okay, well, hold on. Doesn't Sun Peak have projects in both countries?
No, but they have a history in Eritrea, and they're
Oh,
in
okay.
Ethiopia right now. Yeah.
Okay, thank you for correcting me. That shows how much I know. Okay, so tell me about Sun Peak because you seem to be quite fond of this, and we've talked about it previously.
Yeah. So let me summarize it a little bit for people who have not heard of the story. Like Sunpeak started trading in 2020 in August after being a private company for 4 years with three founders: Greg Davis, David Dowd, and Scott Ansell. And they founded it in 2016, and they were involved and responsible for the Bisha discovery in 2003. And then they started another company. This was in Nefson, by the way. And then they started another company, Sunridge, and they discovered the Barawa, Embardero, and Edinefas. They had one of them is a 70 million ton deposit as well, which was also sold like Nefson, but this one was sold to Chinese for a fairly low price. I don't remember the exact number, but I think it was close to 100 million. Um, but they have shown that they can find deposits. Sometimes a couple of those were already found, but they were small, and then they did their trick, and I shouldn't call it a trick, but then they found the bigger deposit sitting close. And so they know the area, they know the structures, they know the belt very well. But then they had the theory like, hey, let's look south of the border because these structures run north-south. And they were uh, expecting and hoping for what they found is the same structure and the same type of targets. So in 2020, when the market was really excited about junior mining again, just after the peak, I think it was, Sunpeak listed and the stock went to $100 million on, of course, excitement, anticipation, and they had a couple of good drill holes already. I think they already drilled Melly, which was a 37 meter of 2.5% copper and 2.5 gram gold. But the really new targets, they were not drilled yet, like maybe even 10 targets. And the market really got excited. And when they finally started drilling, the war in the Tigray started, and this of course ended all that excitement. And it was a really tragedy for the country because it's. Let's not talk about that war because there's a lot that happened that you cannot even capture in this hour. And it took 2 years, and then it ended with the Pretoria peace agreement. Afterwards, there was still a lot of unrest, but in the 1.5 year following, where we are right now, things stabilized, and some private companies already went into the country. There was a delegation of German government visiting the Tigray last year, and slowly but surely, companies started to work again. But Sunpeak took a bit longer. They had a sort of a security company advising them, and finally they got their green light, and they're confident they can work in the country again. And that's why the stock price went from 15 to 18 cents, and right now 50 cents. And I think it's all because they have 10, maybe even more, but like 10 key priority targets, and those look so amazing to me at least, and I think to more people. And on top of that, you've got this amazing share structure where everybody who held the shares for 2 years and didn't sell, I don't think they are planning to sell anytime soon because they really want to get the answer as well. Like, is there another big Bisha in here? And I think that's the summary of why people are buying right now. And it's very illiquid. So a little bit of buying can already get it to this level. And also a little bit of selling can get it back if something changes again in Ethiopia, of course. That's the real risk here, I think, the country risk. But the targets are amazing. And if they miss on one or two or three targets, they've got 7 other targets left, and most companies would say it, but in this case, I think it's really true. In my opinion, it's really the country that's providing most of the risk here in the short to medium term.
So it's a target-rich environment. I'm looking at the deck. I see some of the gravity surveys. They've done a lot of geophysics, and it really is a target-rich environment. So this is VMS, which we know can be a bit tricky at times, but it seems like they've got like a hotbed of VMS activity here at the Shire project, which is sort of how these things work. They tend to occur in clusters. So that's very interesting. So it's run up to 49 cents from 20 cents at the beginning of the year. And is this run up just, is it 100% due to speculation? They're going to start to drill soon?
Yeah, and it's no longer speculation because they put out an announcement about a month ago, and that's when the stock started running. Uh, it took me 2 years to build a position because it's really not liquid, and that's the low point was 14 cents or 13 cents, I think. So it's 3 or 4 back up from the absolute low, even though there was almost no volume there. And I think the stock was, last year it also briefly hit 30 cents. Just a little bit of speculation that everything would restart again could do that to the stock, and now it's confirmed. So they put out a press release like, we will start again. We are waiting for another news release where they will describe what they will exactly drill, in which sequence.
Mm-hmm.
Those targets are, I mean, if you look at the deck and you spend 5 minutes looking at it, you don't really get the full picture of how amazing those targets are. There's a video that Greg did in 2020 with Eric Coffin, and it's just a sort of an interview where he explains one of their targets, Anguda North, and that's just one of the 5 or 10 amazing targets that I'm looking at. And if you listen to that story in detail, and I've done it a couple of times, it's this is how they develop these targets. They have, in this case, there was a bit of drilling nearby and high grade copper, but it was just very like 3 meters of 3% copper. They did this soil survey that traced a zone, and then they did this gravity. And the gravity, they are not using it like most companies. They really use the gravity like in high frequency. Like every 100 meters, they have a line,
Mm-hmm.
a grid basically, and that defined this big gravity anomaly. And in most cases, it's just a blob on a map for me. But here, they also did a VTEM, so the magnetics also confirmed there's something there. And then they also found a Gaussian of a kilometer long right on top of this anomaly. So it's confirmed on 4 different levels, and they have, like I said, a number of those targets that have all those layers on top of each other confirming. And I've also asked people completely independent, not biased like me or excited like me about it, and they also say, well, it's unlikely that there's nothing there. You can always have mafic rocks or something that creates such a signature. But how to explain the gusset and how to explain the soils? There's always risk. Of course, you never know for sure. But as much of a certainty you can have before drilling, this is one of the better ones, I think.
Yeah, so what you've explained, Luke, is how Sun Peak has worked up these targets over time, and they've used many different tools to confirm the quality and the high priority of each target. And yeah, it's obviously there's always risk in exploration, it's just the nature of the business. And the best target on earth can still, you can still drill a duster. It's possible, and it's happened. Um, but yeah, when you have those kinds of copper and soils just lighting up all over the place, and you have multiple, the VTEM and the gravity all confirming that. Hold on, guys, there's something here. Yeah, looks pretty good. It looks really good. So the main risk is the country risk, and you discussed that the civil war is over. There's a peace agreement. Um, does the company hire security for the crew, like while they drill this summer? Is that part of the way this works?
Yeah, that's something I asked them, I think, 2 weeks ago, and I think the answer was yes, we will have some level of security, not armed security, but there's a level of security I think they want to employ. I don't think there's a need for armed security, as far as I understand. I have spoken to private companies active in the country as well, and they have been active for about 8 or 9 months already, and they're not drilling; they are more doing surface work. And they have been traveling around without any security. They have dinner over there in the evenings. And you read, I mean, you can read a lot about Ethiopia, and there's a lot of reports on what the unrest is with neighboring countries, and you can read for hours about it. So there's still unrest in the region for sure. But the reports I have from the ground, from people actually working there, are really positive. But with a note that, of course, it can quickly change. I do realize that this is not the safest country to invest in, but they wouldn't go in. I think if they didn't feel it's safe.
Mm,
I'm pretty sure about that.
yeah, and it's especially in the news on February 7th. The CEO made a point to say it's this region to the north is peaceful and safe, and they feel comfortable going back in there and doing work on their projects. All right, so that's a very interesting one, and as you said, it's not very liquid. It trades about 30,000 shares a day on the venture, which is not a lot, but there definitely was some pretty heavy accumulation in January and February that drove it from 20 cents up above 30, and it's continued a glide path higher into drilling. Before we talk about Barksdale and Delta, I want to ask you, with a drill play like Peak, so let's just say hypothetically, okay, this is not a true story, but let's just say hypothetically, I bought it at 20 cents and it's run up here to 49 cents, and the drill program is a couple months away from starting. And then once they drill, they'll put out the results that will take another couple months. And obviously, there will be the risk that the drill results are not up to the market expectations. How do you generally trade these sorts of stories where you have this run up on anticipation and certainly some level of good results starts to get priced in?
Yeah, this is my favorite question, to be honest, because this is one of the key things I think about when buying a stock, because that all has to do with expectations and a certain price level or market cap level, I think. And the reason, when you're buying 15-cent Sunpeak stock, there's always risk. But at that point, there was no expectation. You can look at CEO.ca or Twitter. There's nobody saying like, "Oh, this program is gonna be amazing," or "This stock is so cool. I mean, I want to own this." So something big is coming. When nobody is saying that, there's really no one with a real expectation. Maybe except for the longer term people who really want to just keep their stock and don't think about it until something starts happening. At some point, there's just no expectation, and a little bit of good news can then spark a stock. And the other way around is true as well. I do realize that if I would have to buy Sunpeak right now at 50 cents, a bit of bad news about Ethiopia can bring this back to 20 cents. So for sure, every time you have a bit of a run in the stock, you have to judge like how much risk am I willing to take at this level. And I think it all has to do with expectations. If you can buy a stock without much expectation, there's also not too much risk. There's always risk, but then the risk is lower because you don't get these panicking sellers really, especially if the stock already is down for a number of years and found its sideways pattern, let's say, and there's almost no one selling anymore. Not many people buying either, but it's sort of neutral. And of course, when it gets hot, like Sunpeak is, it's not cheap right now. It's not expensive either. I think it's okay at this level. If they make a discovery, it's cheap again. So yeah, for sure. Now Sunpeak cannot maintain $50 million if they do not find anything in the coming 2 years. It will not be able to maintain it. That's just a simple truth. I think they need to find something. So yes, it's. I think Sunpeak can maintain 15 million without finding anything, but can it maintain 50 million market cap without finding anything? No. So that's certainly a risk, and that's something you have to be aware of when you buy these stocks.
Would you consider taking some off the table if it went to, let's say, 70 cents in the next 4 to 6 weeks?
I almost always do that, and it's very bad when you get a bit of when you almost fall in love with a stock, because I like Sunpeak a bit too much, I think. So I wouldn't say I'm not going to sell anything, but I sort of decided for myself that these targets are one of the best ones I've seen in a long time. And if you always sell, there's no good or a good or bad here. I think typically I want to sell when things are a little bit overheated too quickly. In this case, the stock is so well structured without any warrant that I think that if they could make a discovery early, and of course that's making a discovery is one thing, making it in one of the first holes is another thing. I think there's almost no seller. It's so illiquid that it could really go to $2 within in a day almost. And I decided that I'm a long-term holder here. And perhaps I will take some stock. I wouldn't. I'm not going to say no, because I would be lying that I would guarantee anyone I'm not going to sell anything. But right now I'm not planning to sell. There's also no liquidity to really sell big positions. It would be trading around my main position, I think, in that case. But
So just to give the listener some of my thoughts. I mean,
hmm,
obviously I'm fairly experienced in the sector, and I can tell a lot in 10 minutes. I subscribe to Mr. Coffin, and he writes about this company sometimes. I have to admit to Eric, I'm sorry, I haven't read a lot of his comments on Sunpeak because I just wasn't interested in the area of the world.
hmm,
But now that I think about it and I hear your presentation and your conviction, I say this is actually a very interesting setup, because the fact that I don't own it and the fact that it's not even on my radar, yet the drill targets are so sexy, is a very interesting situation. And obviously there aren't a lot of people talking about it because nobody wants to own a mining stock in a war zone, right? But suddenly this is not a war zone, and what if this area of the world is at peace for some time to come, right? There's no more war, and mining brings economic activity, right? So it's an interesting setup, and I have to admit to you that it's something I need to take a closer look at. So I appreciate your presentation and the fact that I didn't even know where their projects were. I got the country wrong. I thought it was in the neighboring country. So that makes it even better. So let's talk about a country I do know about, and that's the country that I live in and I have a passport from, and that's the US and Arizona. So Barksdale is a company we've discussed previously on these spaces. I remember like a year ago, you were pretty bullish on Barksdale. It was around 60, 65 cents a share. I think it eventually went up above 90 cents because they finally got the drill permits.
yeah.
What has happened since then, Luke?
This is actually like a nice moment to talk about that one. Because we were just talking about Sun Peak, which is now finding new highs, and Barksdale is finding new lows. And I think, in a way, those situations are not very different. At the time, finally, indeed, expectations were growing. The permit was getting close. They have this amazing target, and that's in most cases the problem. When everybody gets excited, it's very easy to be disappointed later when the results come out. And Barksdale is also in a way a bit similar to Orion and Rupert because it owns a land position next to a world class discovery. There's no discussion there. I mean, South 32 paid 1.3 billion for that property. It made a final decision to spend 2.1 billion dollars. That's just a month ago to actually build it. So they will build this world class discovery. And Barksdale doesn't, the ground they own is not 10 kilometers away. It's not 5 kilometers away. It's literally at the border, like Ikari and Helmi. But the part where it intercepts each other, where the deposit goes to the Barksdale side, is at 1 point something kilometer deep. And juniors drilling very deep holes are of course a bit tricky. And they run into some issues while drilling, and they are transitioning away from the current contractor. These holes are very expensive. I think the financing was a bit disappointing because it was done at 40 cents while the stock was trading months before at 90 cents. And very quickly, a story that's developing can suddenly, I shouldn't call it fall apart, but maybe I should call it like that, because from 90 cents to 25 cents is not very pretty. Um, so yeah, when people feel the financing risk is there, and they may not be able to pull it off anymore, and then suddenly the complete picture can change into complete despair, and nobody wants to own it anymore. And then perhaps the opportunity presents itself again. But it's a typical junior mining story, from complete excitement before to complete despair without even having much of news. I mean, they have a couple of essays out. They were certainly not amazing, but one of them was a scout hole away from the extension, and the other ones had some troubles while drilling. So even though I also didn't become extremely excited with the results to this date. I don't think this story is killed yet, but I think the uncertainty around, can they finance another, you know, 10 holes or 15 holes to really test this extension of this, well, perhaps $3 billion project next door? Can they pull it off? And I think that's the uncertainty, and that's why the stock is trading at 25 cents, I think, right now.
Yeah, it's interesting. I met Rick for the first time, I think, in early 2018. So that was 6 years ago. And they didn't have the drill permits, and they were just applying for the drill permits from the Forest Service there in Arizona. This is the Patagonia region of Arizona. So it's not that far from Tucson. It's southern Arizona, but it's basically their claims, their Forest Service claims. There's three types of claims that you can have, in the U.S. for mining rights, and they have the third kind, which is Forest Service. It's usually the toughest kind to get permitted. The Forest Service is tricky, and it all depends upon the state and the region of the state and all kinds of politics, right? So, but they got the permits. They got the permits in 2023 after a 5 year journey, an arduous journey that a lot of people didn't think they would even get these permits, because this is like a forest, this is it's a state park, and they got it. And they're across from the South 32, the Taylor, deposit that is now being advanced by South 32, a very large global mining company. Um, and yeah, the way the pitch was made to me over the years, and I've heard the pitch a few times, was, look, when we get these drill permits, we're going to start to drill, and you can guess what might happen next.
Hmm.
And that was left to the imagination what might happen next. Nobody ever told me emphatically there would be a buyout offer, but it was kind of, insinuated that South 32 come in and just say, come on, guys, here's 100 million. Let's pack this up and we'll take it. From here. But as far as I can tell, that never happened, and they ended up drilling some very deep holes. I mean, I looked at this news release from February 12th, 1,385 meters, 1,395 meters, 1,400 meters. I mean, that's incredibly deep drilling. I can only imagine the cost of those holes in Arizona with core drilling 1,400-meter holes in probably the highest cost area you could possibly drill. Um, so yeah, the company is in a situation where their treasury must be pretty low, and they're not happy with the results of the drill contractor, which I actually heard is a pretty well respected one.
Mm. Yeah, yeah, for sure.
Um,
It is, and I think if you, I'm a big Barksdale shareholder, so I do feel the pain of the share price. I I always knew that there was that the downside, the risk with potentially being taken over is that there's one very clear customer, South 32, and who else will buy a deposit if proven so deep. So that's certainly something that speaks against the story. But if you have this system and the company is developing it for billions, and I don't think Barksdale's task is to drill it out, uh, to get it into a measured and indicated. I think what their job is to prove that there is a significant extension towards the porphyry, because the original porphyry where it all came from is on their property, and the CRD system, the one that's so valuable, is on the property of South 32. And is there nothing in between? I mean, did the fluid flows not get trapped on Barksdale's side? It's Barksdale's job to prove that there is a significant deposit on their end as well, and then it's like the Orion situation. You know that at some point they will need it, but of course, is South 32 in a rush? Um, can Barksdale do things to make it more interesting for South 32 to acquire them earlier? Of course, if they find very high grade and better grade than on the other side, then of course it could give them that incentive. So I do still think that the story is like what they want to prove is not killed at all. But yes, it's way more difficult to pull it off from a 20-cent level than from a 90-cent level, and that makes it difficult, and that's why the market is skeptical, I think.
just reading the different news they put out. There's still assays pending from hole 3. Is that correct?
Yep.
But hole 4, they started to drill and they weren't happy with the progress of the drill contractor, and they stopped the hole. Is that what happened?
Yes, I don't think they reached the target zone. I think they ended this hole, and the only essays I think outstanding is for hole number. I don't have the numbers in front of me right now, but the number you just mentioned is 3. I think that's the one.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So they said in the news February 23rd that there's additional assays from hole 3 outstanding, but in the news from February 12th, they talked about hole 4, and then they never talked about hole 4 again. So I assume that they terminated hole 4, and that's when they shut down the program.
Yeah, I think that's correct. Let me be careful in not completely confirming it, but I believe that's the story. Uh, with
Okay.
well, I'm mixing up the numbers right now. I don't want to confirm which whole. There's certainly essays outstanding. That's true. If
Right.
whether it's 3 or 4, I don't have it. I would have to look at the news again to see the numbers.
Yeah, so it's kind of interesting because when the share price was 90 cents last June, it was a time of high expectations of a pretty high valuation, and certainly much higher. Now the expectations are basically zero because they're not even drilling, and the valuation is 21 million instead of 90 million. So um, from a risk standpoint, the risk, is ironically much lower today
Yep.
than it was last June. But when nobody's drilling, then nobody's excited, right? So that's, yeah, we'll just leave it there, and I'm sure there's more to this story, and we probably haven't heard the last from Barksdale. I can't imagine that something doesn't happen there. Um,
Well, this is
you
of
know,
course this is, if there's anyone to be interested for, like a strategic or a bigger company, of course they would rather finance Barksdale at this level than at 90 cents. So perhaps
mhm.
that gives the, well, I wouldn't, I don't want to frame this into a positive thing, but I mean it's Barksdale's job to finance and to prove that that they have a deposit on their end, and I think that's the real goal here. And I wouldn't lie that from 24-cent level that's more difficult than from a 90-cent level. That's for sure.
Right. All right. So let's move on to Delta Resources. So here's another one that I know very little about. I just know it's Thunder Bay, Ontario. I know it's gold. Tell us about Delta.
Yeah, I should probably give the short version summary. Otherwise, so the short version summary is that I know the company for a number of years, probably from 2021, I think. And I liked Delta 1 and Delta 2. And there was a bit of, did a good job in financing at higher levels. At some point, they were at 40 cents, I think 45. And I think they had a bit of a target to finance again at a higher level because that's, you prove that you're doing a good job. But the stock was just not going higher. And at some point, I think they waited a bit too long. And finally, they ended up financing at 28 cents, something like that price. And I was thinking about buying it because I liked the targets, Delta 1 and Delta 2, but I didn't because there was some Quebec flow through, I think, coming in where I felt, these guys are probably here for the tax break and not for the company. And 4 months later, that proved to be true because the stock was sold off before any essays were released. But the reason for Delta to do this sort of big financing, I think it was 4 or 5 million, I guess, at the time, is to drill Delta 1 because they felt this is a big target, a big open pittable target, and we need a couple of meters to drill this thing and not finance $1 million. So I bought it at some point between 5 and 10 cents, and they actually made a discovery, the Eureka zone. They before they hit already like zero point 0.4 grams over 80, 90 meters, so they had these low grade but long continuous intercepts. But then suddenly they drilled this higher grade 16 grams over 15 meter or whatever. You have to look up the number. But suddenly the market noticed, hey, there's also high grade in the system, and it took a bit of time, but the stock finally catched a bit and went to 60 cents from the low of 5 cents. And I think the reason that it went so far to 60 cents is that not only were they finding higher grade towards the east, um, they had also holes like 2 grams over 100 meters. So real open pittable high grade intercepts. So things that Rupert also drills in Finland. And I think Rupert, of course, is not comparable. I mean, they are at a different level, but 2 grams over 100 meters open pittable is very inspiring. Let's put it like this. And what they noticed is that they had this mag survey, and the intercepts really like they aligned very well with this blue zone that they have, like the mag low. And they had this theory why the mag low is so low where the gold is. So there's magnetite would give it a mag high, and they had this geological concept like why would the magnetite not be there when there's gold? And I'm not gonna try to repeat that. Call the company to let them explain you, but what it did is it gave a really clear like signature that everywhere where they had this maglow they hit gold, and to the east they had this even deeper blue, like darker blue zone that sort of just extended the zone they were drilling. And I think people started dreaming about a sort of Detour Lake or Canadian Malartic type scenario where you're building ounces very rapidly, and they have released all the assays. Some people are estimating it to be at 2.2 million ounces right now, 1.3 grams. So if you could double or triple that, and the grade would go up to whatever 1.5, 1.7 grams, then suddenly you talk about you compare yourself to the biggest open pits in Canada. So I think that was the reason it went to 60 cents. But they drilled the deep blue zone and they completely, well, I wouldn't say they missed it completely, but there was not much there, and that's why together with a bought deal financing, I think, which was not very helpful after 4 months, the stock went back to 8 cents. And what they told me at PDAC, and I would not have known this because they also described it in a news release, but I didn't read it. They told me that, hey, we did a 3D IP survey, and what we've noticed is that there's a fault over there, and the complete system rotated. if we use this 3D IP and we model our drill holes, they completely missed the target because we were just drilling down dip and we probably didn't even hit the zone. So if this theory is right, and of course that's a big if yet, but I was quite convinced when they explained me the complete story in a bit more detail than I'm doing right now. It could be that if they turn the drill rig and they would just drill the other side, that suddenly they do hit the blue zone, and then they have 2 or 3 kilometers of strike, uh, and perhaps the best part of the system. But of course, now I'm speculating because this is a bit because the mag low is even lower, uh, and it's certainly as wide, if not wider, based on the mag. So if you play around with verify, I mean they have a nice verify deck, and you play around with the numbers and with the drill holes, you can see that okay, if this theory is true, and I think that the safest scenario is to just watch those drill holes, not the coming release, I think, because they still have to drill those holes. But I think from April you will see results coming in, and if those results are anything like wide and high grade, I would say anything above 1.5 grams, 80, 90 meters ish. I think it could be a complete game changer again, and that's why I think Delta uh, is at least on my radar again. There's two ways to play it. I mean, buy it cheap right now. I bought it 13 cents to be completely open. The safer way is to wait for those results and see if that concept is true.
Yeah. So this one's had a bit of a roller coaster. In 2023 was a high flyer, I guess, on that initial, gold discovery that you talked about from 9 cents to 50, 61 cents. And that was during a really crappy gold market, gold sector environment there in 2023. It was kind of a high flyer, but then obviously they had to prove it, which is something that we talked about, how there's the buying on the anticipation, the sizzle, and
Yep.
then all of a sudden you got to prove it. When you've had your share price go up 5 or 6x, you're drilling, you got to prove it. And if you don't prove it, then you're going to crash back and smash down to earth, right? And that's what they did. And now it's starting, it looks like it's starting to build up again in anticipation of the summer drill program. So this is in that area where Moss Lake is. That's a multi-million ounce gold deposit. And I see their presentation. I mean, it's big scale. I mean, yeah. So if they're able to step out, you know, 2 kilometers or something and hit, 30 meters of 3 grams or something, then yeah, it's gonna catch fire again. But this is gold. It's gold exploration in Ontario in a very big area of land. So it's tricky. It's tricky, and there's plenty of margin for error here. Definitely not a proven concept. But you like it on the potential, the big pie in the sky potential here, and then it could have another run like 2023.
Yeah, but this is not like a skinny vein system where they hit and miss and hit and miss. If you look at, I mean, they have like already 2 kilometer of strike where they hit in almost every hole, or probably every hole. It's just that the average grade, I mean, people who were calculating with the drill data were saying the average is 1.3. It's probably higher than I expected because of there's some high grade shoots in this system where they really hit some, yeah, for example, 700 grams over a meter or something, which is not necessarily positive because that's just nuggety and more difficult, of course, to model. Uh, but I think D2 Lake also has a bit of that. So I think really if they can show 1 or 2 holes in this deep blue zone that hit whatever 70, 80, 90 meters of 1.5, 2 grams, or maybe more, if that would be the case, I think then you have a completely open 2 kilometer that you can test. And this is what, like I said, this is not a vein system where you hit and miss. I think once you have the control, you have a good handle on the geology, then you can just drill it out. And that's the sort of scenario I hope for. I'm not saying that will happen, but I think it happened over the 2 kilometer they already drilled. And they have a level of warrants, I think, at 30 cents or whatever level. You have to look it up in the financials. So
Mm-hmm.
I don't think the stock will suddenly triple from here without results. It could run up a little bit more, I think, maybe 20 or 25 cents, maybe. but I don't think you completely miss out by waiting. I think the safest way is to wait and to know where they will drill those holes. Like when are they really testing this target? In terms of time, it's probably March, April, and release maybe April, May. But if you know what to look for and you see the results, then you can decide for yourself, like, hey, this makes sense, and let me buy some delta. Or if you're more a risk seeker, you could also buy it right here. I'm not saying it's not valuable without the deep blue zone, but I think that's the real upside. If this deep blue zone turns out to be the 2 kilometer extension of what they already have, then I think it's a pretty good story.
Okay. And then I'm going to ask you one more, and then we're going to wrap up because we're going almost an hour here. The Hercules Silver copper discovery in Idaho. We discussed it a little bit briefly in the messages. Um, and you said you could only comment so much on it. But I'm just interested in your thoughts on when a company makes a new discovery and you have a major come in and take a 10% plus stake in it. What do you think about chasing other companies that stake in the area, and then you see these new companies come up on the CSE? We've got some land in the area around this, new discovery. Do you ever chase plays like that where, you know, well, it's in the same area, so it might have the same potential?
I'm not a big fan of area plays. Just the things we just discussed, where Orion, is drilling the immediate extension and Barksdale the immediate extension, and there's a good story and real geologists behind it. I wouldn't call that an area play. I think area play is when there's a big hype around a company, and suddenly everybody seems to have some ground around it, whether it is even close to it to the mine, but everybody will claim they have something, and that's almost never working out. I think with Hemlo it worked out in the 80s, but I cannot really remember a recent example where it really worked out for a company to be that area play, except for a short while. And I think the best example is probably Novo Resources when they hit those nuggets in Australia, and suddenly everybody wanted to own ground in that area, and all these companies started to get money. So if you really feel like there's a big flow of capital to a certain theme, whether it's an area play or whether it's even a thing like lithium or uranium, then I think I would trade it. I don't feel that's happening right now with Hercules. Well, let me say, like, Hercules, I don't think right now big enough to really carry a big area play where everybody will just go into it until they have taken the concerns away. Because initially it was a big hype. Now people are a bit concerned, I think. Um, when I looked at it at the results, I realized, hey, this could be a real and legit discovery, and I bought stock at 32 cents, hesitating because they have 45 million warrants outstanding in the money, and I almost never buy those things. And I think the crazy thing about it is, and I don't think anybody said it in this extent so far, it took $26 million to double this stock. Can you believe that? What is the typical average volume in a junior miner? $30,000 a day. It took $26 million and a potentially world class discovery to double a stock, a mining stock. Typically, you're looking for five, six, seven baggers, and with 26 million in it, you're expecting to sit on a five bagger. It did work out because it was, everybody believed it was like this is a potential world class discovery, but it proves my point, I think, of be careful with all those warrants, because with 45 million warrants, it took $26 million to only double the stock, and then it became a five bagger because this was the real deal. And of course, right now there's some hesitation and there's discussion between geologists whether or not they're seeing the right things here, the right grade for it to become significant, and that's why I'm not playing it right now. I want to see a big intercept that completely changes the perception again. But I think what I take out of this is that when you have so many warrants and it still takes you $26 million to double a stock, it proves the point of the warrants. And on the discovery itself, I feel like the market's excitement is not there right now, and I think they need one or two or three holes that really are spectacular to get it back into play.
Yeah, you made some excellent points there. So you're referring to back to last October when it had that initial thrust up on the hole 2305, the 45 meters of 1.94% copper. And yeah, the share structure heading into the discovery was such that they basically had to have some really good results in this drill program, or else it was going to be a very problematic, I think, situation. So it was a real stroke of luck that they hit this new discovery, this porphyry discovery there, and there were a lot of warrants. And you saw Barrick actually bought some of the warrants from a fund that was holding the warrants at 11 cents. So they
Yep.
bought 7 million warrants, with an exercise price of 11 cents, and they paid 94 cents. So they paid $1.05 in total for those shares of Hercules. So it took some time to clean things up and shift the shares around, and that's a very good point that you make, because if you didn't have Barrick coming in and putting $30 million on the table at $1.10. Yeah, like I'm talking in total, because they bought shares on the open market. They did a 110 financing. They bought the warrants. In total, it's over $30 million investment. If you didn't have that in the validation that gives, it would have been a bit more challenged, right? And so, but
Mm.
now it's interesting you make that there's not much buzz, and I think you're right, which is very interesting because there's not much buzz. And I talk to a lot of people who are somewhat skeptical. I would say more people are skeptical than positive. Obviously, some of my close friends and associates are more positive because they talk to me. But just in general, there's a lot of skepticism out there, right? And it's interesting. Well, skepticism, but it's a $220 million market cap, right? So
Mm.
that's showing you that there is some real money backing this thing now. And then the final point, the area play. So it's interesting because this area play, we haven't heard much about it, but you're going to hear more about it. There's going to be some companies coming out on the CSE. And so just watch for those. And I'll throw out some little pieces of advice here. You're going to see some companies with pretty small land footprints, and they're all going to be on Forest Service claims. And that means that none of them have drill permits, and none of them have really done much work, or they haven't done any work, right, on the property. So they're going to just be trying to ride the coattails, and I would be very, very cautious, and definitely look at the track records of the management, and how they got their shares, and what's the cost basis of their shares, and all that good stuff. Luke, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate this conversation.
Yeah, Robert, thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun. I hope that the listeners got something out of it.
I think they did. I think they did. Thanks a lot. I'll post this on my YouTube channel at Goldfinger Capital, and we'll do it again in a few months.
All
Cheers.
right. Thank you.